Good evening. I'm Pearl LaCroix, Miss Pearl to my friends, Aunt Pearl to my many nieces and nephews, and Miss LaCroix to the over 200 students that I taught during my many years as a teacher here in Covington. Now, unlike some people you may hear from here tonight, I passed over not that long ago, in 2005 to be exact, at the age of 96. My life spanned quite the historical arc, from the beginning of flight to man on the moon and beyond. I lived through 2 world wars, the Great Depression, those insane 60s, the rise of computers, and the beginning of the internet age. It was truly a remarkable time to be alive. I was born in 1908 to Paul and Pauline LaCroix. We lived not far from here on Independence Street. In fact, our family home still stands today right next to my alma mater, St. Scholastica Academy. I was a lifelong resident of Covington. In fact, I rarely strayed far from southeast Louisiana. My father had been mayor of Covington from 1914 to 1919, but in 1933 he passed away from a heart attack, leaving my mother to raise 7 children alone. Times were very difficult then because that was at the height of the Great Depression. As the oldest, I had to step in and become a surrogate parent to my 3 brothers and 3 sisters. It was a job I took very seriously. So seriously, in fact, that I never married. Since I'm buried here alongside my parents and some of my siblings, it's safe to say that I never strayed far from Covington. I suppose you could say that I was the typical maiden aunt school teacher, but I was devoted to my family, my students, and my community. A community, I might say, that I find very difficult to recognize today. My early childhood was a happy time, despite the fact that it took place during the shadow of the First World War. My school days were full and rewarding. I was a well-behaved child and a good student involved in the arts. I frequently won medals for music, spelling, and deportment. My Sunday school deportment was exemplary, and I was frequently involved in dramatic performances at my alma mater. In 1919, I performed in St. Scholastica's musical In the Land of 1,000 Echoes, and I won 2nd place in the recital competition at the school's Junior Dramatic Club. And my writing skills were also recognized. I won in 1923. I won a bronze medal for my essay, Keeping Our Roads Clear. It was also submitted for a state competition where I also won 3rd place and later published in the St. Tammany Farmer. As I got older, I became involved in Covington society, whether it involved my church or other organizations for young ladies. I was elected junior president of the Women's Auxiliary of the Spanish-American War Veterans. I served as leader of the Tallahassee 4-H Club. I served as president of the Girls League of the Presbyterian Church, and I served as president of the Florida Parishes Council of the Presbyterians Young People's League. Quite a mouthful. And I loved bridge. I was extremely active in the Bon Temps Bridge Club. We could often be found playing for hours at the Southern Hotel. You could usually find me playing bridge, laughing, and having so much fun. You know, I understand that there are people today who still remember my laugh. Imagine that. But those were my extracurricular activities. I was completely devoted to my family and my students. After my father died, I spent the rest of my life living with my mother and taking care of her, as well as my brothers and sisters. You know, I never regretted not having married or having a family of my own. I had so many nieces and nephews, as well as hundreds of students over the years. I was never lonely. My students were my children. It seemed natural to become a teacher. After all, teaching was one of the few professions that was available to respectable young ladies in the early 20th century. For over 40 years, I was the strict Miss LaCroix. Perhaps it was because I was raised to take education so seriously that I required the same of my own students. My early years of teaching took place during the dark days of the World War II. Those days were difficult on everyone, but they were especially difficult on the children. Food rationing, metal drives, paper drives, and rubber drives. But worst of all was never knowing who was going to lose someone to the war next. But we soldiered on. I was dedicated to my profession, and I worked hard to develop relationships with my students and their parents. That effort was rewarded because my students' parents always had the greatest turnout at PTA meetings. Quite a point of pride, if you don't mind my saying so myself. Parents always knew that they could come to me if they were having difficulties with their children. Well, I remember one mother who came to me distraught because her daughter needed to go to a dental appointment but was too afraid to go. Well, the child was one of my students, so I told her that if she needed my help, that I would go with her. I told her to come by and pick me up when it was time for the child's next appointment. And I went along and I helped her through the ordeal. Of course, over the years, I had to go along to all the child's dental appointments. But she went. Of course, you never knew over the years who would wind up in your classroom. I remember long ago, I had an extremely shy young boy in my classroom. Of course, we all remember the tragic events of November 1963. Imagine my shock when I learned that in the wake of President Kennedy's assassination, one of my students, Lee Harvey Oswald, had been arrested as the assassin. While I was even investigated by District Attorney Jim Garrison, he questioned me during his investigation into the potential conspiracy. All I could tell him was that the Oswalds had been transients and that Lee had been an extremely quiet student who kept to himself, a loner who always sat in the back of my classroom. So, what does a lifetime teaching come down to? How many lives did I touch, directly or indirectly? Did I teach some of you, or your parents, or your grandparents? I don't know. All I know is that a teacher has the power to humanize or dehumanize a child with a kind or a cruel word. The magic of teaching comes when a child realizes that he or she can. My job, of course, was basically just to convey knowledge, but it was also to open up a world of possibilities to my students and to make sure that they understood that that world was within their grasp if they just reached for it. I did that for 42 of my 96 years here in Covington, and I loved it. Standing here tonight, looking back at my life, a life that some might consider tame, I know I wouldn't change a minute of it.